I went to see The Northman 2 days ago, and to put it lightly, I was blown away. The Northman stars Alexander Skarsgård as a kind of Norse Hamlet, driven by a terrible thirst for revenge following the untimely death of his father. The film's director, Robert Eggers, claimed in an interview that The Northman was the most accurate depiction of the Viking Age, and I'm inclined to agree. The level of research and attention to detail is unprecedented and puts shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom to shame.
Oh no! Backstabber alert!
As such, I'd like to make a few videos on the film, looking at various elements and the historical basis informing what occurs on the screen. While the story begins in Norway, we soon jump forward in time and find an adult Amleth rowing down a river. Runes on the screen spell out Gardariki, the name given by the Norse to the kingdom of the Rus, Scandinavians settling in Eastern Europe. One of the main characters, Olga, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, is a Slavic slave girl captured when Skarsgård's character attacks her village. In these scenes, characters converse with one another in a foreign language, so I'd like to pose the question of which one is being spoken, and which language would these ancient Slavic peoples have been speaking at the turn of the 10th century when the film is set. Bearing in mind that I've only seen the film once, as it's still just in cinemas, this is based on some informed guesswork, as well as doing some digging online at what other people have posted. It's clear that the language being spoken is a Slavic language rather than Old Norse, because even with my limited knowledge, I could make out certain cognates such as rodzina, meaning family, in several modern Slavic languages. This also makes sense as the Rus largely encountered Slavic-speaking peoples who lived along the banks of the rivers they traversed, such as the Dnieper, Dniester, Volga and Don, in modern-day Russia and Ukraine. In an interview given to Collider at the end of 2021, the director Robert Eggers was asked, "You're known for being very accurate to the time period that you're filming. Did you ever debate having the characters speaking in the native language, or was that really just not something that you would consider with the budget you were playing with?" To which he replied, "Yeah, it would be my preference for them, for the characters to speak in Old Norse and Old Slavic, and they do in some ritual situations, they do." Eggers refers to the language as Old Slavic, although this as a linguistic label is a little bit more complicated than a label like Old Norse. The definition of a Slavic language is one that evolved from an older form called Proto-Slavic, the mother of Ukrainian, Polish, Bulgarian and Croatian, to name just a few. This ancestral form is thought to have been spoken some 3,000 to 4,000 years ago in Eastern Europe when it split off from the neighbouring Baltic languages. Slavic tribes who spoke this Proto-Slavic language could probably continue understanding one another with little difficulty and some dialect difference until about 500 BC, at which point we can probably start talking about different Slavic languages emerging. Of course, without a written record, because the Slavic tribes at the time were still illiterate, it's very difficult to know any of this with any certainty. And these dates are based on just one scenario of the possible development of the Slavic languages. What appears to be the case from analysis of modern Slavic languages is that an Eastern and Western dialect split occurred, developing various different characteristics. For example, Old East Slavic evolved pleophony, in which extra vowels are inserted between consonant clusters. The effects of this can still be seen today if one compares Old East Slavic derived Russian words moloko, gorod and gorova to Old West Slavic derived Polish mleko, grud and krova. While I couldn't make out whether this sound change had already occurred in the speech of the guards in this scene, native Slavic speakers on Reddit posted that they could understand Olga when calling up the sea using the words Siversky Viter. Clearly, in Viter, meaning wind, we can hear that pleophony has occurred. It's also very similar to how north wind, which this presumably means, could be said in modern Ukrainian. A connection with Ukrainian seems confirmed, as in the end credits of the film, mention is made of a consultant for Old Ukrainian. This label is given by, for example, the 20th century linguist George Shevelov to the dialect of Old East Slavic spoken between the middle of the 10th to the late 14th century, though it is sometimes also called Ruthenian. Well, this is probably the language being spoken by Olga, at least a reconstructed version of what we think this language was like. Some Polish and Russian viewers have also claimed that several of the extras can be heard speaking both bits of Polish and Russian respectively. Lines like "Ko mnie," meaning "come to me," sound like modern Russian, though it may simply be the case that these basic phrases have not changed substantially from their Old East Slavic forms. Some commenters suggested that the language in question might be Old Church Slavonic, although for a few historical reasons I think this is quite unlikely. Old Church Slavonic emerged in the mid-9th century when Byzantine missionaries transcribed the Slavic languages to translate liturgical texts in order to convert the Bulgarians. The Bulgarians and other Slavic peoples living in the Balkans were speaking South Slavic dialects. And while Old Church Slavonic would also go on to be used in the manuscripts of the Kievan Rus, eventually having an influence on the Russian language, there is little evidence for it replacing local dialects as a spoken vernacular during this period. The regional diversity in the once uniform Old Church Slavonic writing in the mid-11th century provides evidence for local variety in speech that influenced the way monks were writing the language itself. These dialects of Church Slavonic became, after conversion, the liturgical language of the Church, just as Latin was in Western Christendom, although it was significantly closer to the vernacular languages of the Slavic parishioners of the Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe. A good comparison might be with an early medieval Frenchman who would be speaking a language derived from Vulgar Latin in the street, but when in church he would be receiving Mass in ecclesiastical Latin. Both were derived from the same common ancestor, and while he could understand the language in church, it was different to that which he would speak in his everyday life. In summary then, it seems likely that Olga's character in particular is speaking a form of Old East Slavic, likely related to modern Ukrainian and Russian, and that once again Eggers and his team did their research and consulted a Slavic philologist. It's possible some of the extras are speaking a more modern variety of a Slavic language, although the possibility that these basic phrases have changed little over time and that they are too actually speaking an Old Slavic language is also certainly possible. In any case, the addition of the speech and the attention to detail when it came to the dress, as well as the helmets and equipment of some of the Slavic fighters, certainly aids the immersion of the viewer when it comes to the scenes set in Eastern Europe in the Northmen. Let me know if and what elements of the history of the Northmen you would like to see me cover next. Special thanks to my patrons for their support, and if you would like to do so, you can follow me on my social medias, which are linked below, to keep up to date with what I'm doing and where my next videos will be. I have been Hilbert, and this has been The History. In an interview given to Collider in 2021, Robert Eggers, the director, actually said, "No, fuck. Special thank you to my Patreons for supporting me, and if you want to, you can follow me on